Hello, everyone who's here and everyone else. My name is William Wyatt. I'm president of Dana, and this is Dana. Welcome to it. This is the regular meeting on October 1st, 2021, and the topic at hand, as will be relevant for some, is an overview of the Supplemental Security Income Program run by the Social Security Administration, federal level. We'll get into it. Agenda for this meeting in general. We're going to go over basically these bullet points. We'll go along as we go. At the very end, and it's not going to be terribly long, I don't think, because there isn't an overwhelming amount of material here, despite the fact it's a very intricate program. It's going to be relatively short, just a brief overview, and we're going to have free discussion at the end, where we're probably going to hopefully go into like problems that exist within the SSI program. Here we go. First, some announcements. One of them is that we are officially official as an official club. Yeah, paperwork got sorted out not too long ago. If you are a member, and if you are also a student at Sacramento State, not an outright requirement, but highly recommended, please go to the Hornet Hub. If you can't find it, we can direct you there to sign up, sort of to put your name on the official roster for our club. We also have some future plans that we've been discussing with our head of SSWD, Dr. Vance, who is here today with us. Hello. One of them is that focus groups discussing disability as an issue and the programs we're going to be implementing on campus later on are beginning, particularly on language around disability, but presumably the scope goes somewhat beyond that. We're going to be also working on, through SSWD, some workshops for students and staff on disability language, but also disability accommodation on campus. That's currently, I'm told, for set for next fall, starting workshops. And we're also thinking about doing Dana on campus at points, with the idea that can increase participation because we can offer food and stuff. With our official status, we have a budget for that sort of thing, and that seems like a priori a good idea. It remains undecided simply because having an event space is one thing, having regular meetings on campus is slightly another, because there's a somewhat greater potential health risk for people. We'll figure it out as we go along. We want input from members on any and all of these things, particularly the event spaces, but SSWD is reaching out to Dana to get student participation, if possible, on the other two items here, focus groups and workshops. Okay. Any questions on that? Shoot them to me, either on here if you want to, or via email, or at the Dana email, or in Discord, or whatever. Thank you. Okay, so basic level, never heard of this term before. What is SSI? The Supplemental Security Income Program runs through the Social Security Administration. It is funded, however, by taxpayers. We'll get into it. In general, the basic idea is that it's a benefits program for people who meet certain criteria. Any of these things: low income and 65 years or older is one demographic, or those whose disabilities are render them medically unable to work, and for some reason they specify it the blind. I'm not sure why they actually feel the need to put to make blind its sort of own category apart from work prohibitive disabilities, but there you go. It's basically a program designed to meet basic needs for those who have particular disabilities which prevent them from getting their own income. It has a very similar program also attached to the Social Security Administration called Ssdi, or I believe Social Security Disability Insurance. That one is somewhat different. Here are the differences, basically. SSI is we should flip these around. Hang on. Ssdi, Social Security Disability Insurance, is funded through Social Security taxes. That's the thing on your payroll that everybody contributes to. And accordingly, your ability to benefit from SSDI is attached to your prior work, that is, your prior contributions to the Social Security taxing. It also pays out a little bit more, but there's extra criteria attached to it essentially. SSI is less intensive in that way, in that it isn't tied to your work. It's funded by the general taxation, general federal taxes, and it's needs-based. You don't have to meet criteria that is sort of work-related to qualify for SSI. And it also pays less, so that's the trade-off. We'll get into like how little it pays at the very end because that's huge. There we go. But in general, and I'm putting a little bit of political philosophy right at the top here because I can't help myself. Why is supplemental security income important? It's a very straightforward case of wealth redistribution. And this is sort of not exactly Bayesian economics because it's not big enough. Bayesian? Keynesian. Anyway. But essentially, the function of SSI on a sort of societal level is to take a little bit of money from those who have more than they need and give it to people who have less than they need, particularly disabled, because they, maybe we, tend to fall very strongly on the having less money side of the economic equation. So yeah, basically it helps people have their basic needs met. It injects money into the economy by putting it in the hands of people who are going to spend it on consumer goods rather than people who will invest it, if at all, in like the stock market, typically. I don't want to overgeneralize the rich, but yeah. Essentially, it's helpful. To whatever degree it does this wealth redistribution top down, it is helpful for society in general, and it's extremely helpful to the people who benefit from it, who receive that money and then spend it on stuff that they can't do without, things like housing and food. So to get it, what do you got to do? One of the ways is to be 65 years or older and on a low income, which is to say a lot of 65 years and older people. But if you are not 65 or older, there are other ways to get in. You can, I should actually say there's only one way to get in if you're not 65 or older. You have to meet disability requirements and meet low income requirements both at the same time. So that'll be like the crux of the rest of this, where what is your way into SSI if you are in need of its services? You got to meet disability guidelines, and you got to meet guidelines for being low income and low resource. So what are the issues with how they go about doing that? The description of exactly how they go about it was longer, but then we have to pare it down for the PowerPoint to make it a reasonable length of time to spend here. So one of the first pitfall you're going to run into if you're trying to apply for supplemental security income is the fact of what they think a disability is. It's on Social Security Administration's account. It is a medical thing. And the idea is that you should, if you are disabled in such a way that prevents you from working, right, that should be describable in medical terms. Whereas, we've covered in a previous meeting, and a lot of people will sort of know intuitively that disability in actual life is functional of your circumstances. You are disabled because you are in an environment right now that was built for someone with a body that doesn't look like yours, that isn't yours. You can't use that environment to its fullest, ergo, you are disabled, regardless of like the medical underpinnings of that fact. SSA doesn't see it that way, or it doesn't officially see it that way. It's a medical thing that you have to prove, and you have to prove it by comparison to what they call the Blue Book. The Blue Book is essentially a list of conditions that will sort of meet disability guidelines. There is a little bit of wiggle room sort of built into the system around that, but essentially, if your disability isn't in there, if your disability isn't easily categorized by the Blue Book and the people arbitrating it, you're probably not in. Again, a little wiggle room is built in. You can argue things like medical equivalence if you want to get in, but that's on your doctor's shoulders, essentially. You have to have that, extra step in your process. And it can be challenging because now you're debating like what disability is with a bureaucracy. Anyway, so if you say you actually meet sort of requirements, well, you then have to sort of prove it, and not just in theory, but in practice. You got to go to your doctor, you got to get tests done, and you've got to potentially hire, or at least, get the services of some way, a special sort of attorney. I remember it being called a disability services attorney, a special, a field of law, which will, advocate on your behalf. But there is no step in this process that's like proactively given to you. But there's no part of this sort of eligibility requirements that is free. And in fact, suppose that you are disabled in a car crash or something out, apart from work, outside of work. Let's say something happens and you are blind in both eyes as a result of an accident that happened outside of your job. Overwhelming likelihood is you're fired. Overwhelming likelihood is no benefits because the injury was not work-related, but it prevents you from working. Overwhelming likelihood is that you lose your insurance as a result because your insurance is tied to your job because you live in the United States. So you're now exactly the candidate for SSI, but you seemingly have no way in, at least no way if you don't have a lot of help from outside parties like friends or family. That's probably huge. I don't have the statistics on it, but it's a gigantic hole built right into the system that if you lose your insurance, i.e. the ability to pay for your doctor, and if you lose your job, you need SSI and you can't probably get it, or at least you have a very difficult time getting it. There's also this, and it's been termed the poverty trap. It's a little bit, it's complicated. This is Rian's contribution. Rian, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, before I do that, I do want to interject. The reason you may need a special attorney, especially when applying for SSI, isn't just because the entire process is extremely complicated, convoluted, and frankly inaccessible to anyone who struggles with reading or technology or seeing, actually. It's also because they have a very high rate of denial, and oftentimes you have to appeal the denial to get the benefits, and that can take a lot of extra legal work, and that's why they recommend that you get a special attorney, they being other groups that help disabled people that are not tied to the government, like Disability Rights California. They can help you with that, but that's why you need a special attorney, because they will often deny your first attempt to apply to SSI, and it'll often take the second or third attempt, and all the meanwhile, it's a months-long process each time. So that's why they recommend you get an attorney. But the poverty trap, basically, as you will see how low the limits are for SSIs in terms of how much wealth you can have while you're on it, it's essentially forcing a lot of people who might exceed the requirements for those wealth caps but still need financial help to either be left behind and keep struggling on their own, or to give or lose their wealth and the opportunities to get more wealth in order to stay or get on benefits. For example, for SSI, $2,000, just $2,000 is the total wealth cap that you can have as an individual. It can vary if you have a partner, but that's in general, as a general rule of thumb, that is the wealth cap that you will get. And there are also different income cap limits that you can receive based on your marital status. If you exceed that, you no longer are eligible for those benefits, and you stand to lose the benefits that you actually need really badly. And so that means that this limits the job opportunities that you can take, because you have to do a lot of math work and try and figure out, if I take this job, will it sustain me without the benefits? And will I stay on the job long enough that losing those benefits won't be a loss? Because think about it, if it's not a stable job, if you could get fired at any moment, then it's not worth it, because then you're left without any income at all. And say you have monthly medication prescriptions that you need to pay, or you need to pay for more equipment at the end of every year. You have to have some sort of stability if you have a lot of medical needs, because medical needs are expensive. And unfortunately, SSI is a lot of people's number one source of that stability, that financial stability, even though it isn't a lot. So it's essentially forcing people into poverty, because that cap limit is below the poverty line. There is a program called Ticket to Work that can help with some of this, where you can trial working a job without losing your benefits. So you can have your job and you can have your benefits, and you don't have to worry about it. But the problem is that it's temporary. It's not meant to be a permanent thing. It's a transitory thing where you work on the job thing and then they let you go, and the job is your income and you're not on benefits anymore. And while the program is good, it doesn't solve the problem of not being able to have a well-paying job and benefits so that you can actually pay for your medical expenses. So this in of itself is still a process, because it is a program that's run by the government. And because it's a process, it's not as simple as just getting a job. And I should put simple in quotes, because getting a job isn't that simple in the first place. And so you can still lose your SSI and Ssdi benefits if your income exceeds the requirements with this new job that you got through the program, but you can still keep Medicaid and other government funded healthcare. So that's a huge problem with the program, SSI.
I have several editorials to add. I should save them for later. But please bear in mind, I may wind up doing a lot of talking later, and I'd forgive
That's
you
all right.
for not forgiving me for it.
We're here to talk. It's okay.
Yeah. And so the poverty trap is like you may notice, like, the only problem that we've outlined so far with SSI that proceeds forward from the part where you get in. You might not be able to get in. Every single step in this process is incumbent upon you to complete, not only in terms of time and effort that you might not have, but in terms of money, at least for the most part. To what extent help may be available, financial help with the process of achieving SSI benefits, I don't know that they exist. At least I wasn't able to find any. So yeah, you're going to be reliant on either yourself, and you might not be able to pass all these checks, or you might be reliant on friends, family, and strangers, and that itself is not especially sustainable. So how do we proceed from here?
Sorry, I added that.
So, no, good. This is the again a problem that proceeds from after you get into the system. The figures were decided upon a while ago, is the thesis statement that belongs to the top here. The maximum monthly income you can get from SSI is $794. Average, only $577. So do I even need to say, like, think about your actual real world expenses and consider like whether or not this would be this is a viable way to have shelter and eat food and so on and so forth. Literally the cheapest property that I know of is the cheapest bed space here in Sacramento, city of Sacramento, is in the Upper East Side Lofts, which is affiliated with the Sacramento State University, and therefore is only accessible to students. Otherwise, if you want to live anywhere near the university, if you want to live in the city, relatively close to a job, maybe like accessible by bus, if you want to be trying to get out of SSI, you're going to need a good deal more money than even the maximum amount that is being potentially, if you can pass all the other checks, offered to you. As I say, any of the examples would be sort of needlessly depressing.
And the other thing with that is that a lot of people counter this point with, well, it's expensive to live in the city, so just don't live in the city. But that's, oh, thank you. That's not entirely feasible. You can't always just pick up and move somewhere else simply because it's cheaper there, because it's expensive to move in of itself. And you might not be able to afford that all at once. And the job opportunities and the healthcare available to you varies wildly from place to place. And the reason cities are so populated is because usually the best options for job opportunities and healthcare is in the cities. And that's important if you're disabled. So that's why you can't just say, oh, just move to the cheapest place and live there instead. That isn't feasible for everybody. And it should be equitable for everyone to be able to live where they want instead of trying to figure out where to live based off of the benefits they receive because they can't find a well-paying job to support anything more than that.
Again, I have so many things. Yeah, this is part of the project of, I suppose, being a college student, but also, you know, getting information via a source like Dana. Not that we're a perfect educational resource by all means. Please do your own research. This is sort of public service announcements, basic overviews of SSI and stuff. But one of the things you sort of eventually get out of that is a project of seeing the spider web of events in the world, the sort of the ways everything influences everything else. So for example, if you want to, exactly as Rian was just talking about, if you want to, you know, get a job, if you want to have opportunities to have income, you're going to want to live in the city, especially if you're like a wheelchair user. Good luck being a wheelchair user in the countryside. It's not going to work for you. You're going to need to live in a city. So in doing so, you're going to incur incredible rent expenses. And in doing that, you're going to render the benefits that you've been relying upon, if you're relying upon them, if you're able to get there, essentially useless, because it doesn't cover anything. So you're going to need to go through other programs, many of which exist, but are going to have similar sort of bureaucratic administrative problems where, yes, the money's there, and there's potentially a lot of money to be had, but you have to go through so many checks that all of which put extra burdens on you, the consumer, that you may not be able to access any of those any more easily than SSI. So that sort of leads us into the Ssi Restoration Act Hr 3763, which has been, I'm actually not updated on what's going on with this act.
Oh, it's stalled. It's stalled. They haven't touched it since they introduced it, which is why you need to harass your senators today.
Is it
Is
senators?
the slide up, or is it frozen on my end?
You're good. Yeah. Anyway, so the details of the Restoration Act are not in this PowerPoint because it's already 7:33, and we want to have discussion portion. But we begin to see why it's maybe needed. Those income figures are very, very old, and that's sort of the talking point that's been proposed. To my knowledge, I don't really know what the rest of the Restoration Act looks like if it updates the system otherwise to be more accessible. It may do. I hope it does. But that's part of it. That's going to be part of solving the long list of problems that we have sort of touched upon, barely touched upon here today. So we're encouraging people to support this act regardless of party affiliation or otherwise, political leanings, simply because it serves this function of helping people to whatever extent people are able to access it.
Yeah.
So this is
just a quick overview. It simplifies the SSI claiming process, which will help a lot of people get in. It expands the resources and the income limits, and it sets the minimum limit at 100% of the federal poverty level, which is way more than 2,000. And it eliminates
poverty level changes,
deductions and benefits.
Updates.
And you can get married without losing your benefits. So that's just a quick overview of what they plan to have in it, which is why it's so important to make sure this gets passed.
And it's stalled. I don't like that, but it's not killed, and I do like that. So there you go. Politics. Okay, so the discussion portion is here. There are 3 of us in this chat room, 2 officers, 1 Dr. Vance. And we've been discussing already. I suppose I can insert a couple of my editorials for the remaining few minutes we've got. One of them is that, and I'm a student of political philosophy, you can kind of tell as we've gone through the list here of issues that follow SSI, the policy, the way it's written, you can kind of see the conservative influence. And I don't mean, Republican Party influence. I do mean conservative with a lowercase c, in the sense that the policy very much prioritizes what some have called fiscal responsibility, which is spending as little money as possible, regardless of what you accomplish with it. Every sort of step in the program is every step in getting affiliated with the program, every step in getting SSI benefits in the first place is someone saying to you, yeah, but do you really need it? Are you sure you need some supplemental security income? Are you sure you're disabled actually? And how would I know? I'm not just going to take your word for it. And once you're in, of course, it's like the sort of income levels and the wealth levels that it sort of stipulates for you are not just outdated, although surely they are. They are also designed to accomplish, I don't know if they were intentionally designed this way, but they are designed in such a way that accomplishes what Republicans have sometimes said that programs like this, wealth redistribution programs, usually do, which is keep people in poverty. If you design them this way, then yes, they do. They provide, too little money to live on, and so you're forced to try something. And if you try anything successfully, then you lose the program, and you may wind up in a job that's not stable, not secure, and then potentially have to go through the whole process again, depending on exactly how the sort of administrative system works.
Yeah,
I'm just checking Zoom. The live transcript seems to have stopped, but I don't know if it stopped for everyone else.
It's working for me.
Okay, good. That's all that matters.
Okay.
I mean, hopefully if it's working at all, it'll be copied over into the file.
Yeah, it should be in the file. And is
Anyway.
Brian getting the transcript file? Because I think that would help him with the captioning the videos on YouTube.
Yes, I can
Okay.
provide that.
Okay.
So that's one of the sort of editorials I wanted to make. You can kind of see the political philosophy at work here. Is very much one of make the program as inexpensive as possible, and ideally, and I'm taking sort of a cynical approach to politicking here because I think it is a cynical world. Ideally, I think some of the people who put these policies in place wanted the program to fail. They wanted it to accomplish as little as they could get away with it accomplishing. For the simple reason that then they could turn around and say, hey, look at this welfare program. It's been so ineffective. Yeah. It's a way for, at least the politicking side of this is a way for is a way for politicians to give back to their donors being the taxpayers who supply theoretically the most to programs like this, i.e. the very wealthy, and their constituents don't matter as much as their donors. So there's that.
If you go to the next slide, if anyone has any other thoughts, or if they're need a bit of prompting to come up with those thoughts, I put some prompts on the next slide.
For me, it already shows the discussion slide. I switched to it a bit ago.
Okay, that's weird because it's not doing it for me.
Well,
what is with the tech these days?
I'm hoping the sort of recording transmits all the slides as I'm proceeding through them, as I see them.
I think it does. I think it does it from your screen.
Yeah.
I'm just looking at the text, so don't worry about it.
Okay.
Cool. Sorry, who was that?
Does anyone have any other thoughts? I enjoy your thoughts, William, but you've been talking for a while now, so I just want to make sure that we're not, yeah.
It's a very good presentation, William.
Thank you.
A lot of good details and Rian, very good, very informative. I actually would kind of like to be able to share that with my staff if that would be okay.
Yes,
so I can send the recording to you.
Yeah, when you get the Zoom, link, you could share that with me then, and I could forward that on.
Yeah,
it's good content.
That would be.
And
awesome.
I think that the additional comments that Rian made, especially in terms of recognizing the limitations of the different options is important.
So we have some minutes. The Zoom that I see has essentially ceased its peripheral functions. I no longer have an updated chat or attendance list. So I'm not sure who else is here, but if anyone else is here, I would love to hear your thoughts on this or on anything else related to disability. I promise it ultimately ties back to politics and government and policies like this one. Okay.
I think I'm good. I think I understood what you were trying to say and everything. Obviously, I have thoughts, but like some of those are not appropriate for an educational.
Oh, no. Give us your thoughts, because it's not just educational, it's also social. So if you have thoughts about this, you can say the thoughts. We're not gonna judge you here.
Like $2,000, like, oh my God. What? Like, that's so frustrating.
Yeah, that's like rent at one of the higher end apartments in Sacramento, or renting like a house is around that or higher. That is,
I know it's possible in some cities because like my cousin lucked out when she rented like 1,200 in the house, but like it's not feasible.
Yeah.
It's like
Like, and when they say wealth, they literally mean wealth. So they don't just mean whatever's in your bank account. They mean like your total wealth. Like if you have any assets, that counts towards that $2,000 cap. So like
that's
owning a house or a car.
oh,
Yeah.
it's frustrating.
And obviously there's some flexibility there, but the fact that it's so restrictive in the first place and that there even needs to be flexibility is like really bad, because you shouldn't have to build in caveats like that. It should be already accounted for in the first place.
Universal
Like the
design.
baseline should be that caveat, not below it.
Yeah,
Like-
and conversely, this idea of like tying those caps on the program to the federal poverty level, which is updated routinely, seems to me a better idea, because you will have the at least theoretically, this is the simple model I'm working with, but theoretically, that means the sort of cap on wealth rises to, or sorry, cap on income, I believe, federal poverty is income. Rises with the times, rises with things like inflation, whereas numbers that are set in stone will not. So yeah, seemingly a much better idea. I also want to gather thoughts and theory on particularly like how this program and programs like it, presumably operating under a similar sort of medical model, evaluate what disability is and whether or not you've got one. Because it strikes me as essentially like inevitable, but also a wildly inaccurate representation of disability and how it works.
Just for context, I looked up the federal poverty level just out of curiosity for this year. For this year, for a single person household, the threshold is at around $12,800. That's like 6 times the wealth cap for SSI.
I'm perversely impressed. I think is the word. Like, I feel like I'm watching a supervillain in action.
Yeah.
Like, oh man, that was really
Like
so
how many Lex
interesting.
Luthors do we have in the world?
What was that?
How many Lex Luthors do we have in the world?
Oh my god, I know, right?
It's interesting, actually. Lex Luthor's two like characteristics are being super wealthy and super smart. So we wouldn't know how many real life Lex Luthors there are, because they keep to themselves. They wouldn't put themselves in the spotlight as much.
Lex Luthor tried becoming president. We can't just say he wouldn't be in the spotlight, okay?
True, but consider like the Koch brothers. Do you have any idea what their faces look like?
I don't, honestly. The only rich person
Did you know one of them's
faces I
dead?
know are Elon Musk, Bill Gates, and Jeff Bezos.
Yeah.
Those are the only faces I know. And even then, I still fail to recognize them sometimes, because they're all average white dudes that just happen to be rich. I don't know if that's called reverse racism or whatever, but white dudes in their like 30s to 60s look very similar to me.
It's about how they
About how they what?
Sorry, it slightly cut out there.
Yeah.
Oh.
Did we lose her?
I don't know.
Jackie, are you there? Tech problems galore tonight.
Yep. I'm gonna try. Yeah, again, my Zoom is not working.
Yeah. I
hope
do
it's-
want
I
to
hope things are
mention,
okay
I
on the back
forgot
end,
to
but-
mention this earlier, but there's a whole bunch of different programs that help with some of the pitfalls of SSI. But again, you still have to jump through a bunch of hoops to get into them. I do know that there is a program, I don't know what it is yet because I'm still trying to figure out myself, that helps with housing costs. Then there's CalAble, which allows you to save money. Welcome back, Jackie. There's CalAble, which allows you to save money beyond the $2,000 cap limit, because of the way the program is set up, it protects that wealth from the assessment of the SSI program limits. But if you reach past a certain point, like if you accumulate enough money past the point where they say, okay, that's enough, that gets taxed and counted as your wealth in SSI. And the problem with that program right now, which the program leaders are trying to change, which good for them, they're just limited by the government, is that it's only available to those who have gotten a verified diagnosis of disability before the age of 26. So if you became disabled before 26 and have a proof of that, then you are eligible for CalAble, and there are different versions of it in other states too. But otherwise, you're out of luck. You can't get into the program. They're trying to change that right now, but it's pretty slow going. Yeah, I just realized I forgot to send the Zoom link to someone. I feel really bad now.
But do you know how hard it is to be diagnosed sometimes for people with disabilities?
It is.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so one of my friends recently found out that apparently they're autistic and nobody bothered to tell them until they were like 21. They went to go get tested, and before they got all signed up for that, they asked what the cost was. It was $1,000 to get tested for autism. That's a lot. And that's just for autism. Like, diagnosis is expensive, especially if you have to do tests for it.
And the concern with autism is that oftentimes there's a misdiagnosis because students will oftentimes be diagnosed with maybe say ADHD or maybe autism when really they are not autistic. They're not on the spectrum. They may actually have a learning disability. So those diagnoses get mixed up together quite a bit. And so it is quite a challenge trying to sort that through because again, diagnoses come through and the people doing the diagnosis are not necessarily all as informed as they ought to be.
Yeah, especially if the literature for those disabilities and those conditions aren't up to date with the actual lived experiences of the people who find out that they have it. And not to mention the people who have both ADHD and autism, sometimes the way that presents can make it difficult to diagnose either one or both because there's a lot of overlap there between them.
And there's also the sort of, I suppose, philosophical question of, I don't know, I see everything in philosophical terms, but there's the question of like whether or not diagnosis is even really that important, especially even for determining eligibility for a government program like this, where the stakes seem to be very high, at least insofar as, you know, it's a government program, it needs to have integrity. Because again, we've discussed before at length, and maybe we will do so again if people request it, that disability is functional. It's a social sort of construct, and by that I mean it's functional of the things that we build for each other in society. So theoretically, almost anything can be a disability. It doesn't have to be medically diagnosable, and kind of it seems to me like, especially for invisible disabilities like autism, or a similar, you know, superficially similar and mental disabilities, you can have it be such that your, like, again, your lived experience might not match up with the diagnostic tool, and the diagnostic tool might reveal that, you know, you have maybe something else, you know, you don't meet the diagnostic for this. Here, you know, pony up $1,000, we'll test you for something else. It seems like a very convoluted process to go through without any scientific reason to do so. Where you're not trying to gain a better understanding of the disability, you're trying to put someone in a box for the purposes of checking a box. I don't know. No alternative is coming into my head, for the simple reason that medical testing is probably still the most efficient way to verify a disability if it needs verification. But it means that the people are going to slip through the cracks, that people are going to have to, are going to be unable to get those tests, or in my case, be unable to, you know, function, eventually get a doctor who can identify nystagmus. My optometrist, and it's just it wasn't like a specialist or anything, and not even an ophthalmologist, just a you know, strip mall optometrist, did not know what nystagmus was. I had to explain it when I asked to sort of have that accounted for in a visual exam. And I don't think I convinced him of anything. I don't think he thinks it's real. It's been a while since I saw that guy. But that's just, yeah. The way we sort of design systems around accounting for and aiding people with disabilities, it's a bit haphazard, but more than that, the effect usually is to put a lot of excess, extraneous burdens on those self-same disabled people, whereas they're precisely the people who are least sort of innately equipped to bear those burdens.
I mean, honestly, nobody is equipped to bear the burdens of having to jump through so many governmental hoops. Just putting that out there. We're not meant for this as a species.
So the diagnosis is, you know, I mean, I absolutely hear you. And of course, you know, the government likes to work in mysterious ways, right? So that's one of the challenges, is the diagnosis is not meant to be, it shouldn't be a gatekeeper, I think is what you're trying to say, William, right? It should still be, you know, diagnosis is still kind of important to some degree to actually be able to do disability management. But, you know, because you got to understand what your disability is, and then you got to understand what would be things you need to do to manage it effectively. So that's important. But I think that certain kinds of observations are important. So, for example, a person in a wheelchair scooter is very clearly has a disability, is very visual. Someone who has mannerisms that would be associated with CP or something like that would be very visible. It becomes a challenge with people who may have psychological non-visible disabilities. That's when it becomes much more complicated.
I did want to bring up, there is self-diagnosis, which is becoming more common, not necessarily because more people are trying to fake disability, but because more and more information about different types of disabilities becoming more and more easily accessible online. And when people go online to find out, you know, why am I like this, they find those symptoms to be tied to different disabilities, and they're like, oh, wait, shit, I think I have X disability. And then they search it more, and the more they research, the more they're like, oh, actually, well, I think it's something else, or oh no, this is spot on, I think I actually have this. And I think that's just as valid as going to the doctors, because simply because not everyone can get to the doctors, but as long as you know what's happening with your body, your brain, and what makes you different and what makes you similar, you can kind of be on alert for what other symptoms should I be on the lookout for, that might have gotten buried when I was looking at these other symptoms, and what are some of the services that can help me manage this. It's really useful to have a diagnosis, whether or not it's quote unquote official.
I will mention, and perhaps it's playing devil's advocate, but for as many problems as trying to get an official medical diagnosis comes with, and we've discussed them, we will continue to discuss them because they will continue to be problems. But self-diagnosis comes with a different set of problems, and well, they may or may not constitute actually officially, but they are part of like the reason why those self-diagnoses cannot, be considered official. And whether or not it's like valid as separate, I'm going to call that a separate question, but whether or not they ought to be sort of trusted can be called into question, simply because people are psychologically, and this is not part of a disability that I know of, but it's true of all humans, that we're prone to selective evidence finding. We're prone to cherry picking, for the same reason that if you were to go on WebMD and start browsing, you'd find that you have a number of ailments you didn't know about. You may find that the sort of self-diagnostic tool is easy to sort of select your memory to accommodate. And this is not, I don't speak so much from personal experience here. This is something I know from learning about psychology generally. There is that sort of that mild form of paranoia that exists in everyone's heads, by which you might come to a I don't want to say a wrong conclusion precisely, but an indescriptive conclusion of your own mental disability, if you might meet a diagnostic tool. Which is not to say that like subjective experiences of disability are somehow universally dismissible. Of course not. But having access only to your subjective experiences means that if your brain modifies a memory on you, you might not catch it. So that's worth that. That's one of the sort of considerations. Again, it's the kind of thing that a doctor might tell you in very accusatory terms. I don't mean it that way, but it's possible. It's a thing that can happen. Wrong self-diagnosis.
Yeah, I was talking more about the people who do take their research very seriously and talk to family members or people that knew them in childhood that could help them verify some of the memories that they recall having, and also talking with other people who have experienced the disabilities that they're investigating and kind of comparing experiences and figuring out if this is what they have or if it's something else. Because I think anyone who's going into this research with good faith intentions will take those steps to prevent themselves from kind of cornering themselves mentally into a particular diagnosis outside of like proper evidence for it. So that's kind of the definition I was operating under when I said that. And you do want to be careful when researching this stuff, and you also can't just rely on TikToks and memes to, see if you have ADHD, right? Because not every source for those things are actually reliable. Like I've seen some of the most ridiculous tweets, memes, and TikToks where it's like, this and this is a sign of trauma or is a sign of ADHD, and it'll be like the most mundane thing. And it's meant genuinely and not as a joke. So you do have to be careful when navigating those spaces, but those concerns do exist, and that is valid. But what I was saying was you know, like if you're actually researching it and researching it properly. You know yourself better than anyone else. So if you can find a diagnosis through your research that fits what you've experienced to help you describe what you're experiencing to other people, then that will be immensely helpful in both the short term and the long run.
I think basically beyond what you're saying, though, it makes sense, which is you have to do your research to know, to give an idea, to begin the process of having the conversation with people about what you have understood about yourself to be some of the barriers and limitations you're experiencing. And what you're doing is you're trying to put a name and a context to why you feel frustrated or feel like there's an area where you're not really as functional as you think you ought to be or should be. But again, like what William was referencing, it is important to recognize that this needs to be something that is verified and being worked with professionals. There's a reason why people go to medical school and why they go to programs and things to learn how to do diagnosis. And then there's a reason for why, people can do research online. And I think it has to be a partnership. It has to be working together. And we know doctors are so overwhelmed and so busy with so many things that they're not looking at all the tips and cues and little things that we are concerned about. So the more we're able to walk in the door and say, hey, these are things that I've been experiencing. These are things that might be possibilities, at least to give the medical professional a starting point to know what they ought to be testing, assessing, or checking you with to determine whether or not that really is the actual picture, or maybe it'd be something different. But we have to do our own research. We have to understand what it is about ourselves that we think needs to be recognized.
Yeah. And even if we're wrong with the labels of self-diagnosis, the ultimate harm that can come out of that, of mistaking your autism for ADHD or vice versa, is that you aren't quite meeting the needs that you need fully, because there isn't much of a risk of like wrong medication sort of thing, because you can't get medication for stuff like that without an official diagnosis. So, if you know something's up and you think it's this, but until you can get an official diagnosis, you're using what you think it is. If it helps, right? And the thing too is that you don't necessarily need to be disabled either to use tips that help other disabled people. Like if you find that tips for people with ADHD work on you very well, but you don't think you have ADHD, then just use them. You don't have to be officially diagnosed to use the resources that help you.
Yeah. Okay. Time is 8:06. I want to add like one more thing. And it's again my sort of editorializing, but it's sort of I'm going to give something of a general statement of a way to sort of consider the world as we go through it. Anybody going through the world, dealing with systems like SSI. A thing to bear in mind is that the whole picture, the whole world that we live in is interconnected with various nodes of itself, and those interconnections, the way the whole puzzle fits together, is totally undesigned. It's emergent of a very long and very convoluted and mostly unintentional process of humans doing their best. So very little bits of it will be efficient and work well. Most of it will not mesh together perfectly, and that is not necessarily excusable, but it's perfectly normal. The world is more complicated now than it has ever been, much more complicated than we are sort of evolved to deal with easily. So as we go, as we proceed through life, trying to solve problems, trying to deal with SSI, trying to deal with every other program under the sun, that is a thing to bear in mind, that it's going to be frustrating, but it's going to be frustrating for reasons that involve like a very long list of steps, a very long progression into an extremely complicated world. And it's important, I think it's important to be sort of, if not optimistic, then, have humble about it, like have that context. It's not necessarily you being personally attacked by the system, although sometimes that happens too. So yeah, thank you for everybody who's here. I can't see you because again, my Zoom is not working well. And thank you especially to Dr. Vance for dropping in. And to everyone who is later viewing this on YouTube or wherever the video file ends up. I don't care.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, William. And thank you so much, Rian and Jackie. So glad to have you be at this meeting. I don't know if you've been here before. I'm the only one that's here for the first time, I think. So I look forward to future meetings and to the future activities what Dana has yet to offer and provide. So good luck. Best to all of you.
All right. Thanks again. We'll see you all next time. Bye.
Bye. It's still recording.
Yep. I had to end the task. It reopened automatically. Okay.
Oh.
Now bye.